Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being with us. This is another Kulluna Irada policy session ever since the tragic events that started on October 7 last year. We have organized a series of policy sessions. We have invited our friend Kim Ghattas. We have invited Professor Joseph Maila of Paris. We have invited Nassim Taleb. We also did a session with Ziad Majid and Muhannad Haj Ali of Carnegie. And today, as we are witnessing a major regional escalation, we are delighted to be hosting two of the leading Middle East experts, Ali Vaez and Maha Yahya. Ali started out his career as a scientist. He then worked as a journalist. And today he is the senior project director at International Crisis Group and an advisor to the president of Crisis Group. Ali worked extensively on the P5+1 negotiation process. Like Maha, he was previously worked for the UN. He was a senior political affairs officer at the United Nations. He got his PhD from the Université de Genève, and he also lectures at Georgetown's School of Foreign Affairs. And he is the co-author of a book that I was mentioning, How Sanctions Work, Economic Warfare in Today's World. We are in the midst of a war on the ground and also electronic warfare. Apparently, we are facing a few hackers, but they will be monitored and the trolls will be kept out, hopefully. Maha Yahya is a member of the board of directors of Kulluna Irada. She's also the director of the Carnegie Middle East Center. She has written extensively on citizenship, on pluralism, on social justice. She obtained her PhD at MIT, where she edited the MIT Journal of Middle East Studies. So we will have two perspectives. Ali will focus on Iran mostly, and Maha will try to analyze the repercussions that what we are witnessing could have on the Lebanese domestic political arena, and will also give us the perspective of Washington, D.C. So thank you all for being with us tonight. Let us start with you, Ali. It appears that Benjamin Netanyahu has decided to go all the way, that there is talk of reshaping the entire Middle East once again. We all remember that this is the same Bibi Netanyahu who went to DC before the Iraq war and said that he guarantees that the removal of Saddam Hussein would have enormous positive repercussions on the entire region. And we all know what happened afterwards. More than 1 million Iraqi civilians were killed. Iran's influence rose considerably. Religious minorities were decimated. And in terms of domino effect and democracy promotion, it turned out to be a huge fiasco. Today, Ali, we are hearing again not only the drums of war, but these messianic discourses calling for regime change, calling for bringing down the Iranian regime. How do you view the situation? Is the regime seriously threatened? What do you think will be the Iranian reaction after the anticipated Israeli retaliations? And third and important question for the Lebanese viewers, how do you view Iran's relationship with its regional allies or proxies, particularly Hezbollah, after the events of the past 2 or 3 weeks?
Thank you very much, Karim. It's a great pleasure to be with you today, even though the circumstances are extremely grim and concerning. underestimating the risks and overestimating the benefits of risky action has often resulted in major disasters in that part of the world. And unfortunately, I think we are now in a very similar situation. The Biden administration was very concerned from October 8th that this conflict could turn into a regional war. We know that Israel wanted to preemptively attack Lebanon immediately after October 7th, but was held back by the Biden administration. We're now in a situation that, unlike the first time Iran attacked Israel directly in the past 45 years, back in April, that President Biden asked Netanyahu to take the win and not further escalate, that now the US is basically engaging Israel and trying to select targets of retaliation against Iran, and it's really on the verge of stumbling into that regional conflict that could suck the United States in as well. But to go back to your more fundamental question, the Iranians, I think, were very unhappy with what Hamas did without their foreknowledge. It was in many ways a catastrophic success for Hamas, but it was premature from the Iranian perspective. This concept of ring of fire that we've heard so much about was a concept that the Iranians actually tested in April of 2023. There were rocket attacks on Israel from the West Bank, from Gaza, from southern Lebanon, and from the Golan Heights. And the Iranians realized that two of those fronts, the West Bank and the Golan Heights, were not ready yet to be able to really hem in Israel. And so from their perspective, what Hamas did on October 7th was premature and put Iran in a difficult position. It was quite unprecedented for the Supreme Leader to come out a few days after October 7th and take distance from it. And since then, Iran has tried to thread the needle in the sense that provide sufficient support or encourage some of the members of the axis of resistance to provide sufficient support to save face and pay lip service to the ideological umbrella here, which is the Palestinian cause, without actually providing too much justification for Israel to be able to expand the war. It really has, pushed the Iranians at certain points, like, when Israel attacked the Iranian consulate in Damascus on April 1st, or when Israel killed Hania in Tehran on President Pezeshkian's inauguration day. Massive provocations that were very difficult for the Iranians to overlook, that we have ended up in Iran taking retaliatory action. But all of those retaliatory actions were also very highly calculated and calibrated, again, to prevent falling into what they saw as an Israeli trap of pushing them into a direct confrontation with the United States. But nevertheless, we have gradually moved up the escalation ladder, and we have now ended up in a situation that the Iranians, I think, find themselves in a very tough spot. Of the three pillars of Iran's security doctrine, its forward defense policy, which is based on supporting these non-state actors throughout the region, from the Houthis to Hezbollah and other groups, to deter an attack on its own soil. To its missile program, which again we've seen being used in targeting Israel, to its nuclear program, which was always a hedging policy of having potentially access to ultimate deterrent. On all of those fronts, Iran is basically failing. Its regional deterrence has been diminished significantly. Hamas has, if not destroyed, has been depleted. Hezbollah is, of course, not completely out, but is down, and Iran is exposed more than ever. Its missile strikes on Israel have demonstrated that it has the will and the capability to inflict harm on Israel, but it is really nothing to compare with what Israel and the United States can do to Iran. And the nuclear option, while it's being debated more and more, is not really readily available. Iran can, in a matter of days, have enough enriched material for a single nuclear weapon, but that's not a bomb. That's not a deliverable bomb. That's not a deterrence. It would still take them months to reach that point. And so at this moment in time, they are really on their back heel and in a position of weakness that is quite unprecedented for them. Now, this regime has been in similar tight spots before during the Iran-Iraq War, for instance. It was alone and it was fighting a much stronger army, the Iraqi army, backed almost by the entire region and heavily financed and equipped by almost the rest of the world. But it was a very different, 1980s were very different circumstances for the Iranian regime. It still had the revolutionary zeal. It still had support from a significant segment of the society. Now you have a regime that is at the lowest point of its legitimacy in the past 45 years. You have a supreme leader who's almost 86 now. And so the regime is in a fragile moment. That is true. But having said this, it's also a regime that has proven to be pretty resilient over the years. And I think it's naive to think that it could be any different than the Syrian regime that has survived, or the Venezuelan regime that has survived. Very similar circumstances. But last point I make is that the reality is that all of us who were warning against escalatory risks, including some people in the Biden administration, I think we're slightly discredited by what has happened in the past few weeks. As painful as that is for the Lebanese people and for the region as a whole. But Israel has been able to degrade Hezbollah and decimate its leadership and get away with it at a relatively low cost. And that is what has pushed the Biden administration to be much more permissive in their approach towards Israel. It is also, of course, domestic U.S. politics in the run-up to the elections, which is just 3 weeks away. That plays a role too. But my concern is that this perception of Iranian weakness, this plastic moment in which Israel can really change the balance of power in the region, with its chief adversary, Iran, being in one of its weakest spots ever, and the very permissive attitude of the Biden administration really provides all the key ingredients for an escalatory cycle that could easily get out of control. I do believe Israel is going to respond to Iranian attack on October 1st in a much more forceful way. My own guess is that as an initial step, Israel is unlikely to target energy infrastructure and nuclear sites, but it would respond in a devastating way against the IRGC military facilities, which would then compel the Iranians to respond. And from there, we can get into a ping pong of attacks that would then easily turn into an all-out confrontation. This is likely to be combined as a hybrid kind of attack with cyber operations and other operations, covert operations aimed at destabilizing the Iranian regime. I think for Israel, in many ways, the point is chaos. The point is not necessarily to achieve regime change in Iran, but as long as Iran is bogged down in its internal issues, it has less to focus on axis of resistance and Israel, and that is overall a good thing for Israel.
Thank you, Ali. This was most interesting. Before I give the floor to Maha, one specific question. Many people in Lebanon are wondering if Iran has sort of abandoned Hezbollah. Hezbollah was supposed to be some sort of life insurance for the Iranian regime. Has it become a liability after what happened in the past couple of weeks?
No, I don't think so. Look, the problem that the Iranians have is, as I said, they don't have a lot of viable strategic alternatives to supporting Hezbollah. It's not like they can, abandon the regional deterrence and focus on nuclear deterrence in the short run. That's not going to resolve their problem. So I think they will try to the extent possible, which is something we don't have a clear picture of how much of Hezbollah's capabilities have been degraded, how much of it has been completely depleted. We don't know. Iranians probably have a better sense. But I think they will try to get Hezbollah back on its feet to the extent possible to push back against Israel. And then the medium to long-term game plan for them would be to use the resentment that has been created as a result of what Israel has done, both in Gaza and now in Lebanon, to try to recruit new groups and create new militias that would continue basically the same approach. And it's simply because there is no viable alternative available to them.
Thank you. One last question about the political mood in Iran. We often hear that large segments of the Iranian population is critical of the regime, but we also hear that when we reflect in terms of patterns of change and continuity between the Shah era and the Islamic Revolution era, there is a persistence of Iranian nationalism. Do you think that if Iran is attacked by Israel or by the United States, we will witness a rally around the flag phenomenon, or will they seize the opportunity to topple the regime if they can?
So that's a very good question and tough to respond because, I don't want to generalize what almost 90 million people would think. The reality is we know based on surveys conducted inside Iran that about 80% of the population is unhappy about the country's circumstances. We also know that, about 25% of the electorate went and selected a moderate president. So that's about, 10 to 15% of the population. So
I can no longer
much more revolutionary, radical change. But Iranians, as you mentioned, are also, one of the most ancient nations in the world, and there is this kind of middle kingdom thinking and strong sense of nationalism that is likely to be evoked if the country is attacked, especially, I have to say, by a country that has done, they have seen the behavior mobile screens in the past year. There was a time that a lot of Iranians would not relate to the regime's propaganda about Israel. But now they have seen what has happened to other countries, and I think there are much more negative bottom-up sentiments towards Israel than was the case in the past. So for sure, there will be a rally around the flag effect, but would that really change the balance in terms of people who dislike the regime and people who are willing to side with the regime against Israel? It's really hard to say. But also at the end of the day, I think at this point, it really doesn't matter because, this is a regime that might be now much weaker outside of the country. But inside of the country, as we have seen with all these recent uprisings that have been brutally crushed, it remains very strong and it's in full control. And the opposition inside the country is not organized, and there's basically no viable alternative to this regime. What could potentially happen as a result of the destabilizing strategy that I I said I think Israel also has in mind, in addition to kinetic action against the Iranian regime, you might see arming some of the ethnic sectarian minorities on the borders, like the Kurds or the Baluchis or the Arabs in the province of Khuzestan. So that kind of risk does exist. But overall, I don't see Israeli action triggering a kind of revolutionary change that would just resolve the problem for Israel and the West.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Ali. You're in DC, so you also have the US perspective. I had a few questions for you, Maha, on the US perspective, but before we enter into that, do you have any reactions to what Ali said? Any comments?
Good morning, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. No, not, I mean, I pretty much agree with Ali's assessment of where Iran is today. It is caught between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, it's seen its partners and proxies in the region severely undermined. Particularly, I think what matters most to them is Hezbollah more than any other partner, because Hezbollah was meant to be the first line of defense for Iran in case Iran gets attacked. Now, I agree with Ali, and I've said this before. I think it's way too early to talk about the end of Hezbollah or the death of Hezbollah. I mean, I think this is way, way too early. We're still in the midst of battle, and the dust has not settled. And I don't think any of us have a good sense of how, I mean, what we've seen Israel do over the past year, and then the kind of quick escalation over the past 2.5 weeks is they've gone at different parts of Hezbollah. So they've gone after it militarily now for a year and a half. Oh, sorry, for a year, but especially more with a much more accelerated pace as of September 23rd, with the pager terror attack and then the targeting of the commanders, etc. They've gone after the political leadership with Hassan Nasrallah, and now they're starting to go after other members of the political leadership. We still don't know whether Hashim Safieddin has been killed or not. More likely, but we don't know, no confirmation. So they've gone after they've kind of removed they've had the political leadership, and they're now going after the civil infrastructure. And I think that also is extremely worrisome, and not enough focus has been put on it, have been placed on this. They're going after health centers, schools, anything affiliated, the entire civic sector that is part of the party that is Hezbollah is also being undermined and demolished. What we do understand is their capacity on the ground to continue is still very much there. So for Iran, obviously, I mean, I read the visit of the foreign minister of Iran last week to Lebanon in the spirit of saying, we're now taking over directly. Whereas in the past, they would Hassan Nasrallah was leading in Lebanon. He was making the decisions. There was a decentralized, to a large extent, decision-making process. It was the foreign minister coming in and saying, we need to regroup. We need to lift morale up and say, we haven't left you behind, particularly after the conflicting messages that were coming from New York, to shore up the defenses, because after here he went to Syria, but that's a different dynamic, and to say to Hezbollah, we haven't left you, and to say, I think, to other internal political parties in Lebanon, don't take advantage of this moment, because they still have our backing, and actually we're the ones who are going to make a decision. Because that's the time when we saw a move to try and decouple between Lebanon and Gaza. He came in to say, no, you cannot decouple. So in that sense, I think, yes, Iran is in a bind, and I agree with Karim. It's been hit from different sides. We now have to wait and see what happens with the Israel attack and response. Sorry.
Thanks a lot, Maha. Now that we have covered Iranian calculations and the Iranian perspectives, how do you view Israel's endgame? There was an op-ed a few days ago. The endgame of this war is war itself. How do you view the Biden administration's endgame? What explains the change of U.S. posture vis-a-vis Lebanon. Until a few months ago, we were hearing that the United States were sort of discouraging Israel to attack Lebanon. And now we're hearing that this new Israeli war on Lebanon has been sort of green-lighted by the United States, or at least definitely not vetoed. How do you view this?
I think, I mean, Ali already mentioned, and I concur with his assessment, that the US now is realizing that there is an opportunity here to well, I think in their terms, do away with Hezbollah. I think that's quite wishful thinking. As we all know from experience, you don't do away with organizations like Hezbollah or Hamas in this way. But they see a weakened Hezbollah that's taken multiple hits, and they're viewing it as an opportunity to not only undermine Hezbollah, but also to undermine Iran. And therefore, this switch, this green light that has happened over the past 2.5 weeks after the successive attacks by Israel as of, again, September 23rd. So I think there is that shift in narrative. What worries me, and Ali would know a lot more in Washington, because I'm sure he's having to deal with this all the time, there is this sense of, in the Washington bubble, of euphoria. It's the same mood when I speak to colleagues. It's very much the same mood of 2003 in Iraq, the build-up to the Iraq conflict. We are going to put a new regional order in the Middle East. It's one where, in this case, Israel will be up front and center. They will get rid of their arch enemy, that is Iran. I mean, that's the thinking. There is that bubble. And there is a prevalence of the point of view that has been in Washington, even amongst some hawkish Lebanese, of you've got to destroy Lebanon to rebuild it. And our pushback has constantly been, you can destroy. We've seen Raqqa destroyed, Homs destroyed, Mosul destroyed. I mean, many places have been destroyed, but they are seldom rebuilt. So it's not that easy. So I think there is that prevalent logic, and it kind of creates a dynamic of its own, particularly in a context of elections. They were 3 weeks away from the election. It's very difficult for this administration to shift policy in any way. The only leverage it has, or the main leverage it has, is to say to Israel, we're stopping weapons transfer. That is not going to happen in this period, even though it may effectively cost Harris, VP Harris, the election. It's certainly likely to cost her at least one swing state, which is Michigan. So I think that's the American calculus at this point. The Israeli calculus, yes, it is war for, I mean, we've seen this movie in Gaza already. What we're looking at in Gaza has been an endless war. There hasn't been a kind of, there are tactical wins, and in Lebanon until now, there have been tactical wins for Israel, but the long-term horizon of what is the strategic aim, they say, it started with bring back people, the displaced in the north to the north. But as happens, we always know how war starts. We never know how it's going to end. There's always the next hill to conquer. Now they're saying that their goal is the 1701 and 1559. And I know there's a lot of debate between the two. Ultimately, 1701 Article 8 refers to both the implementation of Ta'if and 1559. So there isn't, one can get to a discussion, but they're saying that this is the end game in and of itself. But honestly, with this administration, government, it's not very clear. What is very concerning in Israel today is you're looking at this is not just the right-wing government. I mean, they make the big bad boy of Europe, someone like Urban, look like as a child's play compared to the kind of messianic tendencies we've seen this government exhibit. And everything that they've done over the past year in Gaza and now in Lebanon. The other worrisome thing that we're also witnessing, and I think it should be of great concern to all Lebanese, is I think there is an attempt, not only through the mass displacements and creating almost a wasteland, the level of destruction is just horrendous. It's far beyond the scale of what Lebanon saw in 2006. This time they may not be going after bridges, but they're going after everything else. Schools, health centers, and it's the same argument. There are somehow Hezbollah guns in every single house in the south. So it's there is a lot of concern that they will. The interest is to create vast areas of literally wasteland, making it impossible for people to go back. There's a debate and there are propositions being made by some members of this government, of this Israeli government, to say we should occupy, particularly Smotrich came out a few days ago and talked about Greater Israel, including parts of Lebanon and reaching Damascus and Jordan and other places. But there are more and more voices within Israel, including by Ehud Olmert a few days ago, saying Israel should reoccupy parts of southern Lebanon and start again something similar to the SLA. It's like you never learn, which will, of course, give credence to Hezbollah, etc. I mean, I won't go into the ripple effects of that in particular unless someone asks.
Thank you, Maha. Indeed, as you said, the situation is reminiscent of 2003. It's also reminiscent of
2006.
You mentioned the Iraq War, 2006.
The Iraq War, yes, okay.
It's also reminiscent to a certain extent of Condoleezza Rice in 2006, who mentions the so-called birth pangs of the new Middle East. But a few months before October 7, Ali, there was sort of a breakthrough. The Beijing brokered Saudi-Iranian agreement. In this regard, how do you view the recent the recent Iranian visit to Saudi Arabia? Do you think these two countries, in the face of these US-Israeli attempts to reshape the entire region, do you view the possibility of Iran and Saudi Arabia pursuing cooperation, finding a modus vivendi, and moving forward with the Beijing brokered process?
Yeah, so one of my friends has an expression for what has happened between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which I think really captures it, which is deterrence by normalization. That's basically both sides, by having much better relations, have eliminated the risk that the other would pose to them. Of course, from the Saudi perspective, they don't want to get caught in the crossfire again, like in 2019, when tensions between Iran and the United States turned them into collateral damage. And of course, they were supportive of the Trump administration's maximum pressure policy against Iran. But then they also paid the price for it when Iran targeted the Saudi oil installations in Abqaiq. And they have learned that if they have better ties with Iran and just be plain nice, they can get themselves out of the line of fire. And also from the Iranian perspective, they would much better have the Saudis, the Emiratis, other Gulf countries in equal distance from them than much closer to the Israeli and the US position. Preventing basically a coalition, an Arab-Israeli coalition against them is a plus for Iran. And of course, there's always the concern that Israel could use the airspace of some of these countries in attacking Iran, or that it could use, or the US could use some of its bases in these countries as launching pads for operations against Iran, military or intelligence. Having these channels of communication with the Gulf states is useful for the Iranians, because they can deliver that kind of implicit threat that if you allow your territory to be used against us, then your territory is fair game in our retaliation as well, which is, pushing against an open door, because the Gulf countries don't want to get caught in between. And so, this is not really a rapprochement. This is not really a fundamentally different relationship. but it's a degree of détente that both sides benefit from. It's not a new, modus vivendi, but again, it's an arrangement that works for both sides at this moment in time. If it is to have more staying power, it has to turn into something much more substantive. But the regional circumstances now don't even allow thinking about those things. A few months ago, people were thinking about potentially bringing the Gulf countries into a trilateral arrangement between the West and Iran. In a way that maybe the Gulf countries could provide Iran with economic incentives as part of a nuclear agreement or some regional arrangements. All of those things are now up in the air because it all depends on once the dust settles where things are standing. The final point I make is that last Friday we had the first of its kind meeting between Iran's foreign minister and GCC counterparts. The circumstances, if again this cycle of escalation doesn't spiral out of control, I think are more ripe than ever to try to figure out a much better modus vivendi between Iran and the GCC. But at this moment in time, that might turn out to be wishful thinking.
Thank you, Ali. One more question about the Iranian domestic political arena. Is there really a change of policy signaled through the election of the new president? He appeared at his visit to the UN in New York to be trying to open a new chapter with the United States, but at the same time, he is under surveillance. One of the paradoxes of the Iranian society, Olivier Roy often argues that the irony is that the first Islamic revolution has given, after 45 years, the most secularized society in the entire Muslim world, that their people are distancing themselves not only from the regime, but from religion itself. So when you have these new generations that are liberal, secularized, westernized, is the new president capable of bringing a new tone, of opening a new chapter, or is it merely another attempt at public relations on the part of the Supreme Guide?
Yeah, so I met the new Iranian president in New York a few weeks ago, and I think I got a good sense of why is it that he's in this position at this moment in time. He's not, he came across to me as not an ambitious person, which might sound contradictory for somebody who's in this position. But I think that's the reason that the deep state, the Supreme Leader and the Revolutionary Guards allowed him to take over under the current circumstances, because he doesn't pose a threat to their power. But he's there to fix a few issues that the regime had realized were becoming threatening for the number one priority, which is self-preservation. And those two threats are, first, the distance between the state and the society, which has become too wide and too dangerously wide, I would say, for the regime. You could see it in the participation rate in the elections, in the presidential elections, which was the lowest ever. And second is the economic situation, which, a few years ago, I think the regime was under the illusion that it could fix it with relying on Russia and China, or with relying on economy of resistance, which is this concept of relying on their own internal capacities to neutralize sanctions. But now they've realized that the only way is to get sanctions relief, is to at least get some degree of economic reprieve through better relations with the West and the reduction in the economic pressure. This is why Pezeshkian is in this position. This is why he has empowered the best diplomats that Iran has to try to achieve that objective. The problem is the timing and the circumstances, right? It couldn't be a worse time to pursue that objective. what made sanctions relief possible for Iran in the past was that there was a degree of segregation between different topics. Nuclear was treated separate as regional or missile program. Now everything is interlinked. It's very hard to imagine that the West would give Iran sanctions relief when it's sending drones and missiles to Russia to use in Ukraine, or that Iran is, supporting Hezbollah and other groups to fire on U.S. and Israeli interests in the region. It's almost impossible to imagine that. So the two objectives that the Pezeshkian administration has in mind right now, which is to get sanctions relief and improve relations with the West, and to stick to some of Iran's national security priorities, which again, supporting the regional allies and the axis of resistance is a huge part of that. These two objectives are mutually exclusive. So, if they can get through this storm, maybe at the other end of it, they would be able to figure out some sort of a diplomatic settlement that includes regional and missile issues. It will be broader than just nuclear. But again, the question is, where will we land after this cycle of escalation, and if there will be any kind of soft landing?
Indeed. Thank you, Ali. I see some of our viewers already raised their hands to ask questions, but before we take questions, I have one more question for Maha, which is quite important. What do you see, what kind of change do you see after the US presidential election? If Kamala Harris is elected, apparently Philip Gordon will be her national security advisor. Will he be tempted to renegotiate an Iran deal like the one that was negotiated in 2015? If Trump is elected, do you view a return to the maximum pressure on Iran? And in both alternatives, what consequences do you see for Lebanon and for Hezbollah?
I think that's not the $1 million question. That's the $10 million question, Karim. It's anyone's guess. Yes, I mean, Philip Gordon is her advisor right now on the Middle East, has been VP Harris's advisor on the Middle East for the past 4 years. He will obviously play a big role, whether he'll be the head of her NSC or something else, we don't know yet. But he definitely will play a much larger role coming forward should she win. Phil is an old hand. I mean, he's written a book on the Middle East. He knows the region quite well. He knows many of the players. And I think that while I don't see a 180 degrees on Israel per se, there might be an attempt to. She's been increasingly uncomfortable with the blanket support that the US has continued to provide Israel in view of the war crimes being committed. I mean, US supplied weapons are being used to commit atrocities and war crimes in Gaza and most likely in Lebanon. So I think we will see some sort of shift of policy, but it will not be a major shift. It may be more increased pressure on Israel to reduce its attacks on Lebanon. I don't know what will be left by then, because there are now 3 weeks between now and the election, and a lot of harm can be done in the next 3 weeks. So it's a very tenuous situation. It's hard to tell at this point whether, how she will shift or whether, how significant the shift would be. What we can see is that if Trump is elected, yes, I think we will see a move. And this is something that has been clear that Benjamin Netanyahu would very much like to have a Trump presidency. It's one that he is more comfortable with. There were leaks out of the US or in the press saying that when Benjamin Netanyahu met with President Trump in Mar-a-Lago, basically he was told, get whatever you want done before the election. I don't want to deal with this. I think we will see, especially if there is a weakened Iran, we will see a return to a maximum pressure and maybe more military adventurism than what we have seen so far. We don't know. I mean, President Trump is quite unpredictable. So it's very hard to tell which direction things will go. What worries me in this broader context is that, and this is something we're not focusing a lot on, which is the global repercussions of what has happened over the past year. And I'll just name three. On the one hand, this whole idea of a rules-based order has translated literally into my way or the highway. So you either go along with me or, you don't matter. And we've seen it in Gaza, and we're seeing it now in Lebanon. The things that are being committed, the crimes, I think the war crimes that are being committed by Israeli forces in both countries. There's even a plausible case of genocide. We have to wait for the ICJ to rule on it, etc. Has really eroded this broader sense of a rules-based order, and with it, this whole reliance on multilateralism, the erosion of all institutions that came out in the post-World War II era. And here, I think it's from this kind of context that we understand the vicious attack on UN agencies by Israel. It began with wanting to undermine UNRWA in a very significant way, down to having a law in the Knesset now that's trying to delegitimize and actually to expropriate the land that UNRWA sits on in Jerusalem, and to ban UNRWA from Palestinian territories. To attacks on the ICJ and the credibility of the ICJ, because it's where the cases against Israel have been brought, and to attacks on the ICC, and now more recently attacks on the UNIFIL. So trying to undermine a large number of UN agencies in very different ways for very different purposes. But broadly speaking, if there is no pushback, this not only underlines multilateralism, but also it means that any rogue nation at any point is likely to do the same. And the third thing I would say, and that's I'll end with this, is that in this process, we've also seen a weakening of a kind of a more liberal and progressive agenda that many of us talk about. In many countries around the world, we have seen the fringe, or what we thought of as the fringe, and that's why I mentioned the far right, as in Viktor Orban and others, becoming the center. And I think there's nowhere, the best perhaps illustration of that is really what is happening within Israeli society and Israeli politics, where what was the fringe, i.e. the settler movement in Israel, has really become the mainstream and very much at the center of decision making in ways that are likely to upend decades of peace building in Palestine and Palestinian territories, in Gaza and the occupied West Bank. We are likely to see, the end game, to my mind, there, the only end game possible given the actions that are taking place, is literally the ethnic transfer of Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank. This is the direction that this current government is pushing in. We don't have a peace camp. For decades, we used to hear there is no partner for peace in the Arab region. Today, there is no partner for peace in Israel. And that also is extremely problematic. And who do you talk to? The division today in Israel is not about pro-peace, anti-peace. It is about pro-Netanyahu, anti-Netanyahu. And so it spells a very gloomy picture in terms of what may come down the road for all of us, whether in Lebanon, in Palestine, or in the region at large, honestly. These things will not stay in the region, but in the region at large, it's not a very positive picture.
Thank you, Maha. That was very insightful. I'll just make one remark before taking question. You mentioned that Kamala Harris's views on Israel-Palestine were quite different from Joe Biden's because she belongs to a different generation. Biden belonged to a generation that had a romantic vision of Israel as people who made the desert bloom, allegedly, and who were courageous immigrants who transformed Israel into a startup nation, Kamala Harris has to take into account the new generation of the Democratic Party, which is more critical of Israeli abuses and more sympathetic to the Palestinians. And what I found also revealing is that there's also a generational divide between Kamala Harris herself and the daughter of her partner, Doug Emhoff, who apparently, even though she comes from a traditional Jewish patrician American family, seems to be sympathetic of the Palestinian cause. So you have two generations, and every generation is becoming more critical of Israel than their parents. I see several hands raised. We'll start with Paul Raphael and Renee Malik of Los Angeles. Paul, please go ahead.
Hi, Karim, and thank you, sorry, Maha and Ali. Listen, it's a very difficult time, and it's very difficult to figure out what's going on. So this is very helpful in terms of understanding, assessing, projecting scenarios. So I don't have any questions on that. I just have one comment, one question. The comment on rules-based, Maha, and rules of war, I think have gone out the window, not now, it's gone out the window for decades now, right? What happened in Vietnam, in Iraq, in Syria, it's been atrocities all around. So it's obviously sad, and but that's a different conversation, different discussion. And it's inexcusable, obviously. I'm not trying to put it into context, but my question really is very specific, Karim, on Kulluna Irada. And in this context of potentially in Lebanon, one hegemon, Iran, through Hezbollah being weakened significantly, a potential other hegemon, at our border, not yet in our midst, but certainly doing a lot of damage. What can we, if anything, and I certainly don't have the answers, organizations like KI be doing, or are we powerless in terms of at least getting our voices heard, or lobbying here and there, or at least representing on behalf of the silent majority or civil society a third way? And I know I may be at this stage kind of being idealistic or a little bit naive, but I'm sure you guys have discussed it, and there's a lot of brain power on this call and on the board. What can we be doing beyond what we are doing to make an impact, if anything at all?
Thank you, Paul. That's an important question. Actually, this is what we've been working on for the past few days. We have organized meetings with most political actors in Lebanon, particularly, of course, our partners in the Lebanese opposition, to try to reflect together on various scenarios. But before we mention these specific Kulluna Irada missions, I would like to take advantage of Ali being still with us. I think he has to leave in about 15 minutes, because all of this, Paul, will depend ultimately on the outcome of this war. So, Ali, do you think that Hezbollah, even if it survives this devastating new war, will be tempted to use its nuisance capabilities in the domestic political arena? Do you think he will be reined in by Iran? Do you think Hezbollah will be kept, continue to be watched as closely by Iran as before this war? How do you view Lebanon, the Lebanese domestic political arena, Iran's relation with Hezbollah? And feel free to give various scenarios. If Hezbollah suffers a humiliating defeat, if Hezbollah manages to have some sort of face-saving exit, or if Israel gets into a new quagmire. In these three scenarios, what future do you see for Lebanon? This will be quite helpful for us to precisely do what we are supposed to do, which is to bring together a new generation of Lebanese who want to reestablish the state's sovereignty and dismantle all militias while maintaining social cohesion, inclusion, and Lebanese national unity. So can you reflect with us? I know you do not have a crystal ball, but can we try to offer some scenarios for the post-war in case Hezbollah is severely weakened, in case it saves its face, and in case it leads to an Israeli quagmire like in 2006.
Thank you, Karim. Not only I don't have a crystal ball, I am also not an expert on Lebanese domestic politics, but what I can tell you is that from an Iranian perspective, survival for these groups is victory. Even if they are diminished, even if they're weakened, again, you have to understand what is the oxygen that Iran uses to fuel its regional policy, and that is chaos. That is, the sense of resentment and frustration that has existed, whether it's within the Shia community in Lebanon. Or the Palestinians, it doesn't matter. But that's what Iran uses as the organizing element to create all of these groups. Again, I go back to the 1980s when the Iranian regime was in the early phases of creating this network. Hezbollah wasn't as strong as it was 6 months ago, but nevertheless, they managed to use, the ground that was prepared as a result of Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982. And again, the Shia sentiments that existed in Lebanon as a result of being a minority that was mistreated for a long time. And it combined those two to be able to create Hezbollah. But the relationship also changed over the years. In many ways, during the Syrian civil war, for instance, Iran had subcontracted its policy in Syria to Hezbollah. It was Nasrallah that was calling the shots on a lot of the moves that Iran and Hezbollah were doing with regards to Syria. So I'm saying that organizing principle still exists, and because there's no alternative to it, I think the Iranians will continue to pursue it. And as long as even there's 10% of Hezbollah that survives, they will work with that, and they will work with the popular sentiments that exist in Lebanon. There are logistical questions here that one has to consider. So Israel, in many ways, has turned the logic that Iran was using on its head, which is that over the years, Iran was transferring weapons to Hezbollah and gradually building its capacity. As of the Syrian civil war, in the middle of it, Israel started targeting that logistical backbone, which wasn't fully successful, but interrupted the weapons flow. Now Israel is much more bold in how it targets weapons shipments, Iranian military presence in Syria. And so it's much more difficult for Iran to continue with that policy. Also, for a very long time, Iran was doing all of this and fighting Israel to, the last Lebanese, the last Yemeni, the last Iraqi, but it was not paying a direct price for it. Now it is. Israel is going after Iran directly. And so all of those things would have an impact on the success rate that Iran would have in the future to continue with this approach, the kind of proxy war, not overt, not direct approach. I think all of that is likely to change. So again, it's very difficult to predict where we would land, but I think I would not overlook that a lot of the fundamental elements that Iran used to turn Hezbollah into what it became, a very powerful deterrence, a lot of those elements would still exist on the ground. Whether Iran would be able to put the pieces together again and create a new group or revive Hezbollah really depends on where this conflict ends and what situation Hezbollah will be in, what situation Lebanon will be in, what situation Iran will be in, and so on.
So basically, what you're telling us, Ali, is that even if Hezbollah maintains only 10% of its current military capabilities, Iran will continue supporting it and tap into the anger created by this war.
Absolutely.
So you see no scenario in which Iran would decide to pull the plug on the proxies, say they are no longer useful, and try to protect its own regime through economic growth or whatever?
I see no scenario because, again, as I said initially, there is no alternative available to Iran. It's not like, people would tell Iran, okay, you will no longer have proxies in the region, but instead you would have fighter jets, right? Instead you would have missile defense system. There is no such option available to Iran, so that its only option is to double down. But, I also remember a very senior Iranian official told me a few months ago that, as tragic as what's happening in Gaza is, this is before the blitz escalation that we've seen in Lebanon in the past few weeks. But he was saying that, what Israel is doing in Gaza is great for us in some ways because, yes, Hamas has been diminished to 10%. But in the process, there's so much anger on the ground that we can create 10 new Hamases. So that's the thinking, and that's, I think, what they would think about Lebanon as well.
We have something to look forward to. Maha, you have a reaction?
Just very quickly, again, I think I concur with Karim, but two things on both Hezbollah domestically, but also in terms of the axis of resistance / strategy of fronts. The strategy or the unity of front strategy that was established 2.5 years ago or 2 years ago, and that was declared, that brought together the Houthis, the Popular Mobilization Forces, the groups in Syria, Hamas, Lebanon, the Islamic Jihad, under one kind of alliance, and which was the excuse that was used by Hezbollah to enter into the conflict on October 8th, has now also been significantly weakened. And I think we need to keep that in mind. It's not just Hezbollah was the strongest aspect of it, but the entire strategy. And part of it also is that the linchpin of this strategy, who was Hassan Nasrallah, has been killed. And Hassan Nasrallah had very personal relationships with the Popular Mobilization Forces, with the Houthis, with the groups some groups in Syria, not all of them, with Hamas. There was trust, there was charisma. So that entire strategy itself has been shown to be actually now has turned into a larger burden, not only on Hezbollah, it's led to what we're seeing today, but also on Iran, I think, in that sense. So that's I just wanted to make that comment to add to what Ali was saying. I think domestically in Lebanon, what I have considerable concern about are two things. One is it's clear that some of the political parties in the country are seeing this as an opportune moment, not for a political awakening or a kind of a reckoning, trying to come together to put together this is a country that has gone through a major economic and financial collapse for 5 years, went through the Beirut port explosion, and now a weakening of state institutions and a political deadlock over the presidency for 2 years. And yet there still isn't any kind of coming together from the leadership to try and find the pathway out. My worry is that some of the parties today are seeing this as an opportune moment to rise above the fray, not rise above the fray, actually, to kind of take hold and capitalize on the moment to re-establish themselves, reconstitute themselves as the hegemons in a system that is changing and shifting and in the middle of transition. And in the process, this is going to exacerbate pre-existing sectarian tensions and lead to communal strife at a time when security services were also impacted over the last 5 years. Hezbollah, in a sense, also is in a bind. And I wrote a piece about this a couple of weeks ago before the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, because they find themselves in a position where there is a lot of grudges between them and the other communities in the country. given their past history, the contention, the assassinations, etc. I won't go through all of this. And my concern is in this context, and we're already starting to see some of this, they are going to double down in the same way that the Iranian regime will double down. They will double down, but this time on the sectarian discourse as a way to protect certain privileges within the system. So unless there's a very quick move to try and break both of this, and get everyone to move towards a more broader, inclusive national discourse, and you may say I'm being idealistic, but that's the only pathway forward for Lebanon that I see.
Indeed. Rene Malik has been raising his hand for a while from Los Angeles. Rene, Ali has to leave in a few minutes. If you have a specific question, please direct it first to Ali, or if someone else has a question for Ali before he leaves.
Yeah. I do have a comment to make about the mention of 1701. We do know, and this group, of course, people who are in the know, realize that 1559 is part of 1701. But I say, anytime we mention 1701, 1559 has to be held up high and underlined, because the other party, Hezbollah, and specifically in this last few days, our distinguished Mr. Berry, have specifically said that yes, we'll talk about 1701, but 1559 is off the table. And that is definitely a no-no. I mean, taking care of this problem by just applying part of 1701 and leaving Hezbollah behind the Litani River with all its armaments and as a militia, that is definitely a formula for the destruction of Lebanon. Okay? Because not only by their presence, but also because of the renewed awakening in the other communities in Lebanon, the other parties, that they really have to do something about it. And that something may end up in a civil war. Now, that's one point. The other point, there was a mention of the Iranian president by Ali. Ali is giving too much importance to the Iranian president. The Iranian president is just a government employee. I mean, the real power is not him. The real power is above him. So, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but maybe Ali can explain this to me. Now,
Ali, is it true? To what extent is the margin of maneuver of the president insignificant, or can he still bring some change?
Karim, can I ask a question for Ali quickly?
Yes, go ahead.
Just on the Kaani reported arrest and
Yes.
And his deputy, apparently the head of his office is under arrest. Kaani is in hospital. Just on this rumor.
Right.
Any comment you may have?
Yeah, of course. So on the president's powers, yes, it's true that the president doesn't call the shots especially on Iran's regional policy. That's really the realm of Revolutionary Guards and the supreme leader. But the decision-making process in Iran happens in the Supreme National Security Council, where it's unlike NSC in the US, for instance, where you only have the appointees of the president basically around the table making decisions. You have all key centers of power, including the head of parliament and the head of the judiciary and president's appointees and the Revolutionary Guards and regular military. Everybody's around the table. And it's a consensus-building mechanism. And so it does matter who you have in the room because they can influence. That doesn't mean, again, that they would they have a veto power or they would be able to call the shots, but it does matter because we see real differences in how more hardline governments behave and how more pragmatic, comparatively moderate governments behave, and the policies are not always the same. Again, there are areas of continuity, but overall, I think it's not a bad thing that you have a lot of people in that room right now who are voices of restraint. The opposite would have been way worse if we still had a Raisi administration in place, for instance. Again, we're talking about marginal differences, where I'm not saying that it's going to be fundamentally different, but again, it's better than the alternative. In terms of what has happened to Kaani, honestly, this is exactly the kind of situation that is very fertile for rumors. my own sense is that just like Soleimani spent the 2006 war, the majority of that in Beirut, right next to Nasrallah. I think Ghani was in Beirut, especially after Nasrallah's killing, to try to help with selecting the successor and putting the group back together on its feet. And it does make sense to me that he was injured in the same attack that was aimed at killing Safi ad-Din. Of all the rumors that I've heard, the one that I tend to believe in more is that he is recovering from a surgery that was conducted on him in Iran. He's not dead, and I would be very surprised if these rumors about infiltration, that he was basically working for the Israelis and now being questioned and all of that. I'd be very surprised if that is true. Because he's an old hand in the system. He was Soleimani's deputy for a very long time. And the Quds Force in general is much more disciplined than the rest of the Revolutionary Guards, in which there has been a lot of infiltration. But I would be very surprised if those rumors are true. I just think that he's probably recovering from an injury. But again, that also shows to you how this fundamental change in Israeli approach is now working. That basically, as of Soleimani's killing in 2020, the taboo of directly going after Iranian generals, Revolutionary Guard generals, has been broken, and this is why it's a fundamentally different game now.
This will be very interesting to follow in the next few weeks. I see some new hands raised. I don't know who was the first. I see Gerard Zouin, Nada Sahnawi, Karim Hatem, Naoum. Let's start with Nada.
Okay, thank you, Karim. If I understood well from Maha and Ali, there is no scenario, whatever the outcome of this war is, where Iran would say, okay, I'm going to let go of my proxies, my military proxies, and concentrate on economy and social reforms or whatever, concentrate on Iran, the way Saudi Arabia is mostly concentrating now on Saudi Arabia. So what does this leave Lebanon with? So the only possibility for us to have sovereignty is for a change of regime in Iran? Is this the only scenario? Or there are other scenarios where we could work towards having Hezbollah progressively relinquished to the Lebanese army?
Thank you, Nada. We will keep discussing this with Maha, but before you leave us, Ali, thank you so much for joining us from DC. If you have some final words, either on this question or anything else, please feel free.
Sure. Again, this is not justification of Iranian policy, but understanding where it comes from. That at the end of the day, there is no existential threat to the House of Saud. They have U.S. protection, and the only concern that they had was the rivalry with Iran, which they have been able to now basically keep the Iranians at bay just by some degree of diplomacy and playing nice with them. It's very different than the Iranian regime that believes that it has enemies in the region, that the United States has always tried to get rid of it, that its own people want to get rid of it, and that it feels cornered, and it feels that it has no alternative other than pursuing the same policy. So that's why I'm cynical about the prospect of change, because when you put yourself in their shoes, and they see that this is critical to their national security, they feel there is no other way, that they are going to just continue on the same trajectory. I'm even going to take it one step further, and my apologies for the doom and gloom, but even regime change in Iran doesn't necessarily help with that, because let's be honest, in situations of radical change, often the most organized institution group in a country would take over. And even if Iran descends into a civil strife similar to what we've seen in Syria or elsewhere, there would still be a central power that could keep at least the core of the country together, and that central power is going to be the Revolutionary Guards. There's no one else in Iran that is organized and powerful enough to be able to take over in the aftermath of massive change, and that's not necessarily going to help with Lebanon. You know, one thing that would significantly weaken Iran's hand is what Maha was talking about, which unfortunately doesn't seem like the likeliest scenario, which is a new power sharing situation in Lebanon that is fair to everyone, a diplomatic solution that would end the war in Gaza, a two-state solution that would deprive Iran of the ideological, fuel that is using to continue with this policy. But all of those things, unfortunately, are unrealistic. So I'm afraid, what's awaiting us is unfortunately more bad news in the region. And I'm sorry to leave you on that gloomy note, but it is what it is.
Thank you, Ali. We hope to see you again in Beirut in better circumstances. Thanks for joining us. Have a nice afternoon.
Great pleasure.
We still have about 15 minutes, so I'm going to take a series of questions, please, brief questions if possible. Karim Hatem, I see Naum Abi Rashid, and Maya Omran, and then Maha will give a joint response to these questions. Karim Hatem, please go ahead.
Thank you, Karim. I'm sorry that Ali left, but I will have 2 or 3 very quick questions. And one remark, which is we always, as Lebanese, tend to analyze the outside forces, but we give little attention to what we could do, as Lebanese. And I think we have underestimated and under-discussed and analyzed this aspect. So my first question is, what is the probability that there is a long-lasting occupation or annexion of South Lebanon? Is it unimaginable, or is it to be considered? And what impact would it have on the US if we, as Lebanese, would be capable to demonstrate a real capacity to build a nation, to unite in a different way, and to attract the Shiites out of their the false dreams they've been pursuing, and to show some real capability and real will to build something different?
Thank you, Karim. Naum, if you can also add, please, a short question, and then Maya and Sami Sayali, and then Maha will conclude with a wrap-up. Go ahead, Naum.
2 quick points. The first point is, after the death of Hassan Nasrallah, Iran put the hand on the party, and they are managing the party. So if Iran will push the Hezbollah to keep on fighting Israel, that means what about the probable ceasefire agreement in the future? Shall we go to destruction of Lebanon like Gaza? Second point, starting today, Hezbollah is changing his communication strategy, and he's saying that there is 2 Hezbollah. One Hezbollah is the Lebanese party, and one Hezbollah is the reaction and intifada fighting Israel. What will be our future as Lebanese, poor Lebanese people, if we don't know how to go to solidarity?
Thank you, Naum. Maya Omran?
Yes, hi. My question is, Maha, you touched base earlier on the division and the resentment mindset on some groups in Lebanon towards Hezbollah, and how they're looking at this as an opportunity, like they're doing them a favor by eliminating Hezbollah out of the picture, and they're applauding the weakening of Hezbollah through Israeli attacks. But my question is, how dangerous is that mindset domestically on the Lebanese people and this divisiveness? Is that really going to serve as any positive from an internal level, because this is definitely it's like a dangerous mindset to think that Israel is doing us the favor by eliminating an ideology. Like, they can definitely be weakened militarily, but ideologically, I don't think it's going to be eliminated in this way.
Indeed, academic literature shows that ideologies survive even when leaders are movements are decapitated. I see Maha taking notes. Let's add the question of Sami Sayali, and then Maha will respond and offer a wrap-up. Tfaddal, Sami.
One of the ways of weakening Iran and its proxy is to weaken Syria. I know you don't have a crystal ball, but do you know anything? What Israel is preparing for Syria? This is my question.
Maha, you have a series of delicate and important questions. Go ahead.
Okay. Just very quickly, on the probability of occupation and annexation, we really don't know. Again, with the Israelis, it's been a moving target. They clearly have been able to move into deeper into Lebanese territory than when they started. What we're seeing is the invasion happening bit by bit. It's not, mass armies moving in at the same time with their tanks. They've been tactical. They go in, they're moving into specific villages, specific areas, but they're, I think, deeper in Lebanese territory than we actually realize. I think also the idea that they will reoccupy parts of South Lebanon is very much on the table of discussion with this particular government. It's very hard to tell where they will stop. I suspect it would be foolish, because from a practical perspective, this is not this is not China. They don't have an endless supply of servicemen. And already the IDF, many, even the reservists, have been serving for the past year in Gaza, many of them multiple times. So there is a level of fatigue and exhaustion. To be able to hold foreign territory is not an easy task. But we have to wait and see. And they should have learned their lesson from the last time they tried to occupy parts of South Lebanon. I think this is where Olmert's proposition to try and create another South Lebanon army, find another, someone else who will lead, because that's the only way they think they can at least save themselves the kind of injuries that or casualties they will get if they were to remain in place themselves. So it's a big question, and it's we have no idea. Again, we're dealing with a government that is not on the fringe. This is not right wing. This is a messianic government that is displaying fascist tendencies in certain places. And I think we need to be very cognizant of that. And it's gotten significant support, or at least, if not blanket support, even silent support from many countries in the West, and it's supported by the United States. So at what point will they say, basta, enough is enough, you have to stop here? We don't know. And without that, enough is enough, they're not going to stop. Especially with these kinds of moving targets, new goals that are announced every day. Basically, we've seen this movie before in Gaza. That's what they've been doing for the past year in Gaza. On the Iran deciding to push Hezbollah in Lebanon, again, we have to, I think what Ali said is absolutely right, and this is, we are reading, is we need to wait and see what kind of Iran we're going to have. We have to wait and see what kind of attack the Israelis are going to commit, how Iran is going to respond. I'll give one small example, which is Hezbollah was supposed to have 150,000, we were hearing, precision-guided missiles, which until now have not been used. Is it because they've been destroyed? Is it that there was an exaggeration and maybe there were 100 or 1,000 and not 150,000? Or are they keeping them to use should Iran get attacked? We really don't know. So it's really a very kinetic and a very dynamic situation where one thing could just shift the whole rhetoric and the whole debate and the whole situation around in ways that at this point we cannot foresee. The question of division and resentment and the kind of the mindset of groups in Lebanon, I have a lot of concerns about it, and I would kind of put it in different categories. There is, there is, of course, the resentment and people saying, good on them, you know, it's not an applauding of Israel or saying, thank you, Israel. I think that's really a minority within a minority. But it is the sense of, okay, finally, you know, there's been a lot of contention with Hezbollah. Hezbollah has been accused. I mean, if we go back to the Hariri assassination, the string of assassinations that happened after that, May 7th in Beirut, etc. I mean, there's been a string, and then also their involvement in Syria in support of Bashar al-Assad. There's been such a contentious relationship, the port explosion. I mean, over the past 5 years, they've really become the face of protecting this particular, the status quo in Lebanon. And I think a lot of the contention around that, a lot of the anger, a lot of the sense of, okay, good on them that they're gone, but it's not a thank you to Israel for having destroyed Lebanon or for helping us get rid of this. I think one of the most evocative, if you like, tweets that I saw was by Dima Sadeh, who, as you know, has been attacked by Hezbollah for years, if not more. And when Hassan Nasrallah came out, her tweet came out, she came out and said, I would not have wished this kind of death on you. I would have preferred that we defeat you politically. And I think her sentiment describes a larger, perhaps, cross-section of people, but it's the kind of sentiment that is needed in Lebanon, not just amongst ordinary people. And we're seeing that. I mean, we're seeing in the way there is, despite the divisions, there is a rallying around trying to help the displaced, which is cross-sectarian, it's national. People are coming together. They are trying to provide humanitarian aid. They are trying to help and support wherever they can, despite all the divisions. And I think this is something that the targeting of some of the areas we've seen Israel target over the past 2 weeks, including a building that was brought down in Saida to kill some mid-level Hezbollah member that no one's ever heard of. They did not need to bring down an entire building. They'd been doing targeted assassinations for a full year. They've got the capacity. The same for the hit in Kola. The same, I would say, the hit in Bashura yesterday. So it's the same thing over and over again, where I think they're trying to ramp up sectarian tensions, resentment, sectarian divisions, concerns about who is your neighbor, who is there. And this is where the political leadership really needs to step in. If we're going to save Lebanon and salvage what we have and move to a Lebanon that we all wish to have, then there needs to be a much broader vision for a Lebanon that includes everyone. This is the time to be inclusive in the dialogue, to bring everybody around the table, مش للشماتة, as they say in Arabic. Finally, in terms of, and I'll just say one thing, Hamas a few days ago came out. I mean, I don't know whether I have no way of verifying this information, but there were some news that said in the last few months, Hamas has been able to recruit about 5,000 new young men in Gaza. And this is coming out of the anger at what has been happening to them. So there is a lot of anger. People are now disoriented. So we need to quickly have an inclusive discourse and a dialogue that really paints a picture for the Lebanon that we want. So the final thing is on terms of what is Israel preparing for Syria. There are lots of rumors, lots of discussions around this, lots of, if you want, contemplations. It's what we're seeing. I can talk about what we're at least seeing right now. We're seeing Israel send very clear messages to Bashar al-Assad saying, stay out of this. A, and B, stop allowing Syria to be used as a couloir, corridor for the transfer of arms to Hezbollah. They're trying to shut that down completely. And I read the attack on Masyaf, but then on the villa of Maher al-Assad, where apparently there was a meeting between some Hezbollah members and the IRGC taking place. Maher al-Assad was not in that villa, but they were there as part of that messaging. We are seeing now increasing attacks in places where we know there is a concentration of IRGC and some Hezbollah outposts in Qnaitra, for example. So there is an increased pace in that sense of trying to cut off supply lines, but also weaken the presence in Syria specifically. This is obviously happening. There was also a hit on Dir'a. Now, do they intend to create also a buffer zone on the Syrian side? I don't know. Do they have the military capacity, physical military capacity to do that? We have to wait and see. They have the aerial capacity to cause significant damage, but I don't know whether they have the boots. They have the capacity to put boots on the ground and control territory in any big way.
This is a beautiful conclusion, what you said about inclusion. You mentioned Dima Sadiq's tweet, and Dima's tweet actually echoed another very moving tweet by Sarah Copeland, who is the mother of one of the Beirut blast victims. Her son Isaac died, and she wrote, I did not want vengeance, I wanted justice. So she felt that she did not get closure. And the same thing was said by our own Kulluna Irada member Roni Shatah. They wanted justice. They did not want to see hundreds of innocent civilians killed. So I think this is a beautiful final word. Thank you, Maha, for taking the time. Thank you all for joining us. And unfortunately, I'm afraid we are going to have other sessions focusing on the tragic situation in the Middle East, and hopefully at a later stage on how to rebuild a new Lebanon that would be inclusive, that would be non-sectarian, that would be sovereign and united. Thank you all for joining us, and have a nice weekend.